Good evening and a warm welcome to everyone. Omshanti. We have Rashmi and Francis that will be doing this evening's program. So welcome, Rashmi.
Good evening, Aruna, and a very good evening to all present today. Cooling down with burnout, such a powerful and pertinent topic in our current times. So today we have amongst us a dear friend and a colleague to address us on this topic, Frankie Weir. Frankie is an occupational therapist who trained in South Africa and is now living and working in Scotland. She works as an occupational therapist in the field of mental health care. Her passion lies in empowering others to attain a healthier work-life balance. Thus, this passion led to Frankie completing her master's research on the topic of stress, burnout, and coping strategies amongst occupational therapists. Over to you, dear Frankie.
Good evening, everyone. It is so exciting to be here this evening with you as Rashmi and myself share on topics that, as she said, they are so close to both of our hearts. And yes, I'm hoping that this evening we will be giving you tools to be able to build resilience as you cool down after burnout. And I'm looking forward to some of the practical tasks that we have planned for this evening, with the hope that that will be something that you can use in your everyday life when it comes to your stress and burnout experience. So this evening, to give you an idea of what we'll be exploring, we'll be looking at stress and what stress is, how it impacts our everyday function, and then we'll look at what steps you can take in order to manage your stress more effectively. Thereafter, we'll be looking at the experience of burnout and what it really means, as this has become quite a colloquial term that people throw around for various circumstances. So we'll be looking at the definition there and the consequences of burnout on our everyday functioning. And then we'll look at what can we do when we've experienced intense stress, burnout, or everyday stress to be for that matter, and how we can develop resilience and coping strategies. Then Rashmi will be sharing on the role of spirituality in developing resilience before we head into a practical task and then give some time for questions and discussion. So to begin this evening's talk, we're going to be looking at the topic of stress. Now, stress is something I think everyone has heard about in everyday life. It is our experience of our reactions to our environment when we feel like we cannot manage or tolerate the pressures that we're under. So stress is our perceived inability to cope with the internal and external pressures we face. It is a universal experience in that no one is exempt from it. Each and every day, all around the world, people will experience stress. And the reason for that is because it is our body's biological reaction to being able to keep ourselves safe. However, it is also uniquely perceived. That means what causes one person stress isn't necessarily going to cause the next person stress. It also means that even if a situation creates stress in two different people, they may perceive it in different ways. And that's kind of an important concept to keep in mind when looking at the topic of stress and stress management, because it can become very easy for us to compare ourselves to those around us, thinking, I'm in this work situation, I'm really struggling to cope, yet my colleague seems to be coping fairly fine with the workload. And then we can easily fall into some of those unhealthy kind of cognitive or self-talk patterns of, if the situation is the same and I'm reacting differently, it must be because of myself. So that idea is important to keep in the back of our mind when considering stress, because it can impact how we then manage our stress. Now, if we see this picture of the zebra, which I always love to think about when we look at the topic of stress, and he's slowly losing his stripes and they're unraveling, I think it's such a pertinent picture of the experience of stress for us every single day, that sometimes it can start as one strand, and if we don't address it, it can result in that strand kind of pulling until we see things unraveling. And if we were to look at that from a bit of a scientific point of view, we would call that an experience of stress over a long period of time that's not managed and can lead to chronic stress. Later on, we'll be looking at what effects that can have on our functioning and kind of emphasizing the discussion we're going to be having tonight about managing our stress and taking back the power to develop resilience in our everyday life. So to kind of break down the topic, because it can be such a big one to kind of bite off, we're going to be looking at a simple process of managing everyday stress. We'll begin with exploring what the importance of identifying what you're experiencing and the fact that you're experiencing stress in a moment. Then we're going to look at, okay, if I know that I'm experiencing stress, how do I identify what's causing it? And we'll look at a few of the common causes of stress there. And then we'll be moving on to kind of the exciting piece of work this evening on how can I apply coping strategies to better manage my stress and also to prevent the experience of burnout, which we'll look at in a little bit more detail. So a part of this process and kind of the first step looks at being able to know what my personal indicators for stress are. Now, in an ideal world, it would be great if we could walk around with an indicator that sits on our desk or in our home, such as this picture on screen, where we could switch it on and say, you know, how am I feeling at this moment? What is my stress level? And while some of our smartwatches reckon they can do that pretty well, I've yet to find one that can fully encompass our experience. So what would be important for us is to develop that skill within ourselves. Being able to sense in a situation, what am I experiencing now? And is this indicating stress? And then from there, we'll be able to identify what it is exactly and how do we take action. So when thinking about your personal kind of awareness towards stress, it can be helpful to think of what are some of the indicators of experiencing stressful situations. So this includes our physical, our thinking, our behavior, and our emotional indicators. So for example, from a physical point of view, when someone experiences stress, it could look like they have increased breathing, increased heart rate, perhaps sweating. It might look like for you that you're beginning to lose concentration really quickly, where you would normally be able to sustain kind of focus in a task for a longer period of time. Maybe you're finding it really difficult to make everyday decisions that naturally would come as first-hand judgment. Maybe you're starting to be a little bit more short with those around you, a little bit short-tempered, maybe having, you know, a bit of an argument with a loved one that normally wouldn't upset you. Perhaps it's even that you're seeing yourself turn towards unhealthy kind of habits more frequently, or perhaps you're even noticing yourself pulling away from those around you and isolating. It may even be an emotional experience that indicates where you're at in terms of your stress, that you're feeling a bit anxious, worried, perhaps overthinking different situations, and that's making you kind of question your own role within a circumstance. Now, as I said before, stress is a uniquely perceived experience. So stress indicators for one person will look different from another. For example, I know the first physical kind of indicator of stress that I get is I get a bit of a stress rash when I'm feeling really nervous. And that allows me to come into physical awareness of, oh dear, I'm in a state of stress. I don't know what's happening here. What can I do? And once we become aware of these indicators for ourselves, we can then start to explore what exactly around us is causing the stress. Now, as I said before, under the definition of stress, it's our individual perceived experience that I'm unable to manage the internal and external pressures that I'm facing. So I really like this equation on the right here that describes stress as the interaction between the pressures that we're feeling and facing, divided by the resilience that we have, which I'll look at in a few moments in a little bit more detail. But when we think about that pressure that we're experiencing, those kind of experiences can either be something internally or they can be something externally. So perhaps to kind of separate the two, it's easier to view them as something that's within my control, that's happening within my mind, my body, my experience, and something that's outside of my control that's having an impact on myself. So some of the internal stress or causes of stress that we can sometimes have is, like I said before, kind of misjudging my role in a situation, being uncertain of where I fit. So as Rashmi said at the beginning there, I've recently made a move from South Africa to Scotland, and it was really difficult for me to settle in to the different roles that I have here. And that was an internal stress that wasn't being caused by anyone else, but was definitely causing a lot of discomfort for me and some of those indicators that we spoke of before. It could even be that there is internal conflict with the expectations that you put on yourself. Again, this experience for me has resulted in me wanting to adjust very quickly. I think that's the biggest question I get is, are you settled? And whenever someone asked me that and I couldn't say yes, I would almost feel like, oh, there's something wrong with me that I haven't quite settled yet. So this is an important concept to sometimes consider, because we can sometimes be faced with saying, everything around me is what's causing me stress. And yes, there are many stresses in our everyday life that exist, but sometimes it's happening within us. And it's important to become aware of those causes of stress, because they require different coping strategies to those that are happening outside of us. So an example of some of those external ones can come to mind very quickly. I'm sure as I'm talking, you're identifying with maybe load shedding, conflict with a partner, stress at work, all of those different kind of stresses. Like I said before, those are the ones that are sometimes a bit easier to identify. So the importance of identifying the causes of stress is, like I said earlier, it allows us to know what action to take. Because if it is something that's external to me, I may not be able to change it, but I could change my way of thinking or my reactions towards it. Now, an important concept that is kind of going to feed into everything that we discussed tonight is being aware and becoming aware of the effect of my personal choices on my circumstance. And being able to see what am I choosing to allow to come into my everyday life that's worsening my stress. So that's just one of the concepts that we're going to keep in the back of our mind, and it's going to come through really importantly when we look at some of the coping strategies that you can apply to develop your resilience. So this next phase of the process is all about bringing into awareness what's causing me stress so that I can take action. Because if we look at the stress kind of equation on the right here, when you see it visually with increased pressure with little resilience developed, it makes sense why our stress would kind of progress and become more. So what we're aiming to do is kind of flip that kind of equation on its head and develop more resilience, even though maybe I can't change the external, internal pressures on me at the moment. I want to develop more coping strategies so that I can have more resilience to better kind of manage my everyday stress, or perhaps even the stage of burnout, which we'll discuss soon. Now, one of the questions that I'm often faced with is, why do we need to pay attention to stress if it's something that we're faced with every day, that everyone has an experience of stress in their day-to-day life. So why take action? And I'm sure maybe the reason that this topic stood out to you is a kind of personal reason for wanting to join is maybe, the stress is starting to have an impact on my life and it's starting to have consequences. And those could be some of the physical health consequences that we view related to stress, such as increased likelihood of diabetes or heart disease. It could be the negative effects that stress has on our mental health, such as leading to increased anxiety or even the experience of low mood or depression. One of the fundamental consequences of stress that most people can relate to is the negative impact that it has on our interpersonal relationships. For example, having more conflict with my family members, finding it difficult to manage my work kind of relationships, finding it difficult to engage and initiate social interaction with others because I'm so consumed by my own stress experience. And in my research around this, it's kind of the people closest to us that get the first kind of part of that. So that can be very detrimental if that's the coping strategy that I'm wanting to implement, is relying and seeking support from those around me, yet my stress is making me be short-tempered towards them. So yeah, just keeping in mind that can be one of the most pertinent kind of consequences of stress. And then, of course, one that tends to be the indicator that people take most seriously is the engagement in our work experience. Stress can often decrease our ability to manage tasks that we were once able to, and then our work engagement decreases, our participation decreases there, and obviously that can have multiple effects and impacts. So with the consequences of stress that exist, one of the greatest ones, and is almost seen as the end stage of chronic unmanaged stress, is the experience of burnout. So burnout was discovered in 1974 by a German-American psychologist who began observing those around him working in very difficult healthcare settings. And he started to observe that people are reacting differently to those around them, and not in a good way. People were starting to take less time to engage with others. They were becoming really over emotional in work situations and altogether looking very overwhelmed. So the concept has been around for many years, and as a result has become part of our everyday language. I think the reason why I initially chose to start looking at burnout as part of my research was because it was such a kind of popular term being thrown around. It was really coined especially in the field of healthcare, and this was before COVID. So, I mean, it got even more, it's been used even more since then. But it's important to consider that it's an occupational phenomenon that is the result or the end result of chronic, so stress over a long period of time that's not been managed. And effectively what burnout is, it's the experience of the three dimensions in combination. It's when someone has become emotionally exhausted, they're starting to display signs of depersonalization, and they have reduced personal accomplishment. So those in themselves can be topics on their own, but essentially I want you to envision burnout as an individual who's begun to lack emotional resources. They're starting to react on their emotions without being able to consider the consequences thereof. They may be withdrawn and negative, they're distancing themselves from their work, or they're even becoming quite short-tempered and mismanaging their social interactions. And in combination with that, they've started to develop negative feelings towards oneself. Like I said before, COVID has a lot to answer for with regards to our stress and burnout experiences. maybe beforehand or before the pandemic, you would have had everyday stresses because we cannot escape those. They're a part of life. However, when COVID came and there were a whole new set of stresses, it became really, really difficult to manage. So I think it's important, and the reason I wanted to add this in here is that there are certain circumstances, such as the pandemic, such as life experiences that are out with our control and have a lot of impact on us, that can lead to the experience of burnout. So what we're aiming to do tonight is to ask the question, is it perhaps time to take action on our everyday stress experiences to prevent us getting to the point where we are at risk for experiencing burnout? And the way that I'd like us to kind of think about this is by envisioning or thinking about your cell phone battery. I'm sure there are many people here that cannot function without their cell phone. I'm definitely one of them. But I want to think of 3 ways we could manage our cell phone battery to be able to connect with those around us and often do our work. So the first instance, or the first step that we could take, is we could wait for our cell phone to die, lose all of its battery, and then put it on charge and have to wait for a period of time before I can use it again. In essence, allowing ourselves to have our stress unmanaged, not take action, and eventually perhaps put ourselves at risk for experiencing burnout, and then have to take a period of recuperating, getting ourselves together before we can kind of do the task that we need to again. The second option that we have, like with our cell phones, is we can wait for the low battery sign to come on and then try rush around to find a charger. If you're like me, it's never where I left it. And perhaps then still put ourselves at risk for the phone dying and not having access to it for a period of time. Again, that's possible, letting our indicators, grow and build, not taking check of the first one. Or we could take the third action step. That would be monitoring our cell phone's battery throughout the day, seeing when it's getting a bit low, seeing when it's been overused, and charging it as we need to. And that's what I'm hoping we're going to be able to learn this evening and kind of discover and explore together, is this idea of developing resilience within ourselves by looking at our everyday stress experiences and applying coping strategies that work for each of us to be able to better manage that. So our first step is kind of looking at what a coping strategy is, because that really leads on to how we apply it in our everyday lives. So a coping strategy can be defined as the thoughts and behaviors that people use to manage the internal and external demands of a stressful situation. So essentially what it is, it's our thinking patterns, the way we're choosing to view situations and interpret them, as well as behaviors or actions that we can take. So by changing our thought patterns, looking at healthier ways of managing those, together with taking action, we're then able to better manage our internal and external demands in different stressful situations. So the application of coping strategies is a diverse topic, and there are many different resources that you can kind of take on to manage your everyday stress. What I've done this evening is kind of try to encompass some of the main ones that I found to be most helpful in my own experience, as well as what the research supports too. So the first concept that can be really helpful in managing our everyday stress experiences is learning to set boundaries around our personal, interpersonal, and work circumstances. Now, again, as I said there, each of these topics can be a lesson on its own, and I really encourage you to take the concepts that we're discussing this evening and really explore it further for yourself. If some of the aspects that I'm going to share on now are standing out to you as important. So a really useful resource if you're wanting to experience or kind of explore boundary setting in more details is a book called Boundaries by Dr. Cloud and Dr. Townsend. But there are multiple resources across the internet. Essentially, boundaries is being able to separate myself from those around me, being able to notice where the responsibility for my actions end and the responsibilities of others begins. Because often what can happen with our stress experiences is they can result from trying to take on too much from those around us and not giving enough space for ourselves. It could look like in a work circumstance, taking on too much work for a colleague who's constantly asking you to and not being able to say no. So it might be very practically developing the skills around being able to say no in circumstances when saying yes would lead to increased stress. It could be in our interpersonal relationships, how we relate to others, being able to notice that sometimes I'm taking on the emotional experiences of others when it's not my responsibility. It could even look like being aware of what I'm exposing myself to on a daily basis. As I said before, when we were exploring the causes of stress, it's very easy to identify multiple external causes of stress because we are bombarded with them on a daily basis in the news and in politics. So it might even be beneficial to be able to set boundaries in terms of what I'm exposing myself to on a daily basis. And that leads to a concept. These two concepts work quite closely together. Another way that we can develop everyday resilience to better cope with our stress and burnout experiences is to encourage ourselves to nurture ourselves each and every day. So this would look like being able to incorporate tasks in our everyday life that fill up our cup rather than drain it. And it's important to kind of consider the role that boundaries play with nurturing, because I think the most common concept that I hear or statement that I hear is, I don't have enough time to do things that make me feel good. Or there's not enough time in the day. Those are common kind of terms or phrases that I hear. Now, I could be quite harsh and ask the question, how many hours do we have in a day? And get to the concept that, each one of us has the same amount of time, but it's about choosing how we spend it. So this might look like very practically taking small steps in our everyday routines and choices to do or to engage in activities that fill up our cup. It might look like waking up 10 minutes early in the morning so that you can spend time just refueling yourself. I know at the moment I'm waking up because the sun is going down very early here and I'm struggling to adjust to that. I've been waking up 10 minutes earlier every morning so I can do a little bit of yoga before my day starts. And that's been over the last couple of weeks as the seasons changed. And I can't tell you what a big impact that's had on just my everyday ability to kind of manage what comes at me. Additionally, it's looking at setting aside time for yourself where you might be finding yourself doing activities that are quite draining. So that might look like being able to set a boundary in putting your cell phone away when it's time for bed, rather than scrolling for hours and hours on social media. One of the aspects that then links to our coping strategies is developing the ability to see things in a positive way and developing our positive thinking. As I said before, coping strategies have a lot to do with our thoughts and our behaviors. So setting boundaries kind of combines the two in terms of being able to recognize for myself, I have been taking too much responsibility here, and then taking action to implement a boundary with someone around me. Nurturing yourself can also be about shifting your perspective to including small tasks within your days that fill you rather than drain you. Whereas positive thinking looks at those thought processes that we're engaging with every day, and whether that's aiding us in our stress experience or worsening it. So because there are so many external stresses in the world today, it's very easy for our cognitions to fall into, or our ways of thinking to fall into worst case scenario thinking or very negative thinking. So this task is about becoming aware, or this coping strategy is about becoming aware of what are you thinking and what are you telling yourself. So it's looking at the self-talk that you're engaging to. How do you speak to yourself? How do you think about situations? And becoming more aware of the positives rather than the negatives. So a very practical way of doing this is through developing the skill of gratitude, being able to identify in everyday life what is good, what I have, rather than what I don't have. So, for example, I could very easily, as the weather changes here in Scotland, focus on how cold it is, focus on how it's getting dark earlier, and focus on how I'm soaked every time I get home. Or I could focus on the fact that, you know, I've had this opportunity to be out in nature, experience that. I have my little yellow Wellingtons that I put on every morning that fill me with so much joy. And then I'm grateful that I have resources to be able to protect myself from the weather. So those kind of patterns of positive thinking can be really impactful over the period of a day. Now, this one is important in terms of the negative consequences that stress can have, in terms of really affecting those that we love and those that we interact on a daily basis. One of the really important coping strategies that we can engage in is seeking support when we need it. Sometimes we can become very absorbed in our stress experiences, and the more that we have them and keep them to ourselves, the more likely we're going to end up engaging in those negative thinking patterns. So if we're able to seek support with those that we know will be able to provide it for us, we can have a real impact on our stress experiences. So I know I have a very close friend that I can take any situation that I'm going to, I can take it to her and we can discuss it, and she just listens really carefully without judgment and allows me to just express myself. And it's important to carefully select who those people are in your life. It could be a friend, it could be a family member, it could be a colleague, but not everyone is able to give you that. So just being aware of who that could be in your situation. Sometimes we don't have access to it, or perhaps we've let our stress go on for a long period of time and we just feel like it's too far out of our control to take it back. In that case, it can sometimes be really helpful to seek professional help. Perhaps this looks like contacting a life coach, a psychologist, a psychiatrist, an occupational therapist, or even organizations such as this, to be able to help you through the process of applying these coping strategies. And finally, a really effective coping strategy can be spirituality, connecting to something outside of myself that uplifts me, empowers me, and allows me to take time to be mindful of situations and not become overwhelmed by the immense amount of external stresses that are placed on us. But I'm not going to get into that too much further because Rashmi is going to take that over in a moment. But before we get to that point, I just would like to finish my part of the presentation with considering the role of responsibility in stress management. I'm really taken by this title here that says, "No single drop of water thinks it's responsible for the flood." And I think that really relates beautifully to the experience of stress and burnout. It can be really easy to allow our stresses to pass us by, have the stress indicators, but ignore them. But if we do that for too long a period, it's going to be really difficult to take back our almost our control over it. So I'd like to leave you with the encouragement that being able to manage your stress again, being able to take back that responsibility of taking small actions and small steps towards being able to better cope with it each and every day.
Okay, thank you, Frankie. I think so much of wisdom shared there, but I would like to then now share on my spiritual journey and how my spiritual practices, many of which I aligned with the Brahma Kumaris, made me resilient and enhanced my ability to deal with adversity. Sorry. So as Frankie already touched on the aspect of spirituality, I just want to define it a little bit more. So literature, there's various definitions of spirituality, but the common themes inherent in these definitions are things for the search for deeper meaning and a sense of connectedness to the self, the moment, nature, or it could be with the significant or the sacred. Now, yes, I think I was always someone who was spiritual, who was a spiritual being. However, or I displayed spiritual practices. However, my search for that deeper meaning and my sense of connectedness with the higher, or with something higher than myself, was embodied through and deepened through my journey with leukemia, cancer of the blood. So going through this experience, first and foremost, something I needed to embody was the virtue of trust. Now, I had to know that everything was going to be okay. I had to trust that the medical staff knew what they were doing and they had things under control. I had to trust that all will be okay with my family, as I was not with them anymore. And I didn't know how long at the moment when I was first admitted into hospital in high care, but I was then admitted for a period of 8 months. It was during this time that I also had the revelation that I expressed my spirituality through religion, amongst other things. So eventually I had to trust and leave everything in God's hands. And that was a way of coping at that time. Then again, looking from the outside of my journey as a detached observer, the whole leukemia journey seemed as a spiritual process. As I said and mentioned already, that I was admitted for 8 months into hospital. So I continually tried to seek meaning and a way of connectedness to something higher. I took time to read inspirational books. And during this time, the sharings of Tadi Janki really helped me to still maintain my trust and keep positive. Another spiritual practice that I embodied during this time was that of mindfulness. I know many of you might have heard this word. It's about being in the here and now. I remember looking out my window and seeing a sparrow picking at a few breadcrumbs, and this being such a beautiful scene for me. It was a scene of life and being alive. There were other scenes like this, like focusing on the rain outside. I became totally engrossed in these scenes. There was another scene that I like to share about. Opposite my hospital window, I could see out at I think it was one of these golf courses. And if I was lucky to get the room, every now and again, we needed to move rooms in the high care. So if I did get that room, I was able to look out at this lake, and there were animals, namely buck and zebras, that would come by to drink at this at the lake, drink water at the lake. And it was such a beautiful scene for me. I could notice the sparkling of the water when they were there and the sun on the water. It was just so beautiful. Because I allowed myself to be engrossed and engaged with that moment. At times, these was so beautiful and so relaxing that even though I was experiencing immense amount of pain, it was all forgotten and I'll fall into deep sleep. So being mindful was one of my spiritual practices that also helped me deal with the adversity and deal with the stress that I was being constantly bombarded by. I also want to set the scene of what that room was like. So it was a very sterile room. There was not much that I could focus on within the room, but just being able to and appreciate and being able to look out that window, always a closed window, because there was no way of opening windows because that will just bring infection in. And I was meant to be, no way could infection come to me. So there should be no source of infection being let in. So I couldn't experience the wind in that time. I couldn't, as much as I could see I could hear the pitter-patter of the rain. I could see the beautiful drops of rain, as well as then sometimes the stormy weather. It all seemed so beautiful because that was what I had to be in that moment. Nothing within the room, but I did take a lot from outside of the room. And this allowed me to control whatever the physical body was going. So it helped me to go beyond what the physical body was experiencing. Another spiritual practice that I embodied a lot was that of affirmations. I used affirmations for myself and others meaning that of the medical staff. This for me then facilitated a sense of control and positive thinking in the situation. You know, I always had to see beyond my physical self. And I always had to focus on my inner beautiful self. I remember standing at the mirror in the bathroom in the hospital. We had our own bathrooms. And saying to myself every morning, "Good morning, beautiful soul." And by doing this, I could see beyond my baldness at that time. My hair is back, so I'm very grateful for that. But it was okay to also be bald or bold, because that made me bold. But yes, I had to see beyond the baldness. I had to see beyond the fact that I was burnt through my skin because of the chemo. My gums were all turned black. My feet, underneath my feet was also burnt. So my hands and the palms of my hands also had black spots. And this affirmation works so well. Such a simple affirmation. "Good morning, beautiful soul." I was able to draw from just that one statement on a daily basis. And I practiced this every day while I was in that hospital room. Okay, doesn't matter what, I got out of the bed, looked in the mirror and said, "Good morning, beautiful soul." Okay. Some other things that I would like to share now, that was with regards to my experience of my leukemia and being hospitalized. But other practices, some I want to add to the practices that I've already mentioned, as well as I also want to say that I still use these practices in my everyday life today to deal with my stresses. So as Frankie mentioned, that it's vitally important for us to fill our cup. So every morning I take time to fill my cup by listening to something spiritual. And this could be some affirmations that I could hear online. And there's some beautiful affirmations that I've been using recently from Sister Shivani. So please have a look out for that. That's those are beautiful affirmations that you can use and practice for your day. I also then made use of some cell phone apps, and yes, there should be boundaries with our cell phones, as Frankie very nicely mentioned. But one app that it would be good to upload into or onto your phone would be one like the B Zone. So the B Zone, BEEZONE, allowed me to gravitate back to my inner sense of peace. So this app has various tools, and it enables you to break away from the goings of the day or the doing of the days, or some of us might call it the rat race of the day. Okay, so the B Zone has many apps, but the app that I make use of on a daily basis is that of traffic control. So every hour, on the hour, a minute or less meditation will play on my phone. So if I was very engrossed in something that was already taking my energy in a negative way, or my mind being worrying about a certain fact or a certain something that I need to do, or perhaps a certain thing that I needed to accomplish, that I needed to accomplish within the day. This allowed me to gravitate back to my sense of peace and calm, and I was then able to work then better with whatever I needed to complete, and whatever I needed to complete for the day was successful. And I still felt that sense of accomplishment. Another practice I want to share, and still in line with my different spiritual practices, was that during the October holidays now, I decided to take some time off because my kids were on, or my children were on leave. But I decided to take this time for myself. And that's what Frankie even mentioned to you. It's so important that we choose to take time for ourselves. Okay, so it wasn't about going somewhere or doing something or going on a holiday. Those were out of reach and not something that the family was going to do. But what I decided then over that October holiday was to take 2 days leave, and one of it was spent on a spiritual retreat in my garden. You don't need much to build your resilience. I think it's as Frankie very nicely said, it starts with thoughts and behaviors. So I decided to then have a spiritual retreat, if you may say, in my garden. Okay, whereby I spend time then listening to spiritual sharings by Sister Shivani and then Sister Denise Lawrence. So please also look out for those sharings because it's wonderful. It's wonderful sharings that they have that can empower you to be more resilient. I gained a lot of knowledge, I must say, on the day retreat in my garden. And when I say day retreat, it feels like it was a day retreat, but in essence, I only took 2 hours out of that day because as always, and as will always be, sometimes us as moms, we need to make the time for ourselves, but at the same time, we also need to we're always busy around the family and commitments and tasks and etc. But that 2 hours, literally only 2 hours, but it felt like a day retreat for myself. Whatever knowledge I gained on that or from that experience, and it's the first time I ever did such, I thought, it's the first time I thought to do such a retreat on my own, in my own space, because many a times I always thought I needed to make time for a retreat. I need to have time to go somewhere. I need transport. I need to fit it into my schedule. But then I realized, after this experience, I can do this on a daily basis. And sometimes just sitting at a water feature in my garden, just being in the here and now, still feels like, even if it's for a minute or 5 minutes or at least 10 minutes, it still feels like a retreat. So please, I just, from my own experiences, something I'm just saying to try out. Maybe it will work for you too, because it's worked for me. The knowledge I gained by listening to the sharings of Sister Denise Lawrence and Sister Shivani, I then decided that I will put that into practice in my daily life. And I'm still aware of what I gained on my retreat in my garden. Another spiritual practice that I do quite often now and recently as well is that I spend time listening to spiritual empowering music. And yes, we can do this every day. Sometimes I do it when I'm preparing the meal, but on a Friday afternoon, I spend the afternoon doing my household chores. Because as I said, there's no way from getting away from what we need to do in a day. It's just a way of seeing things differently. Hey, but while even my son smiles at me when he sees me while doing these chores, I'm so empowered. I'm in a different mood. Everything gets done so easily, and with so much love. I don't feel like, oh, I wish someone else would help me to do this. I wish just the spiritual, and playing that spiritual empowering music. And sometimes I play it quite loud. I'm using my earphones for it or my headphones for it, but it just puts me in a different state of mind. Recently, I've also taken it upon myself to ensure that I share my thoughts and my feelings and my positive spiritual experiences with family and friends. So on a weekly basis, I make sure that I share this with family and friends. My last spiritual practice that I want to share with you today, and Frankie mentioned this briefly, was showing gratitude, and to be grateful for what I already have. This is such a powerful tool for feeling at peace and feeling happy. I take the time to be grateful for my breath. I take the time to be grateful for my family. I take the time to be grateful for simple pleasures. I simply love what Frankie shared on the yellow Wellingtons. I can just picture her in those Wellingtons, all trotting to work and back, all drenched, but still a smile on the face. So yes, those are simple pleasures. Recently, I was also so grateful for the rain and the new pops of color and greenery around me. These practices sustain me and make me dance to the tunes of the world. So I'd like to leave my sharings there. So now, Aruna, I would like to stop and then share a guided meditation with you. Also a daily practice of mine that empowers me. So Sister Aruna, if you can just share the slide. We just wait for a moment for the music to play. Sit back and relax. I let go of the tension in my body, from my eyes, face, neck, shoulders, back, and my legs. I relax. I am here in the present moment. I allow my original qualities of easiness, peace, and love to enter my consciousness. I free myself of all judgment. I love and accept myself. I focus on what brings me contentment. I am capable of deep, super sensuous joy. People, situations are not always my way, but I choose to still remain at peace. I choose to remove all questions, doubts, and thoughts that do not serve me or are not in my best interests from my consciousness. I accept that which I cannot change. I watch my thoughts as a detached observer. I am grateful for all that I have, and I let go of all negativities. I ensure that my inner conversation with myself is always positive and enriched. I am kind and gentle with myself. I say only the right words to myself. I love and accept myself unconditionally. I work sincerely in all that I do, but sometimes I make a mistake. I counsel myself with kindness and motivate myself to do better the next time. I love myself always. I have the power to experience fullness and contentment. I choose peace and serenity from deep within myself. I am free and overflowing with joy. I am a powerful, invincible being. I take time each day to fill myself and ensure that my cup is overflowing with goodness. For too long, I've been distracted by the outside world. Life can be complicated. I do not wait for things to get better, but today I choose to be a master of my inner world, a master of my thoughts, a master of my feelings. attitudes, and actions. I am a flower open to the sun shining. I am a lighthouse, and I choose to spread my radiance to all. Om Shanti. Okay, so perhaps Frankie and myself can now address any questions you may have. Frankie, there hasn't been any questions on the chat as I see.
I see we have a raised hand there, Rashmi.
Okay, yes, from Darshan Mani. Darshan, can you perhaps unmute?
Yes, so I wanted to find out how do you increase your memory of the present moment?
So Frankie, do you want to try first?
I'm happy to hear from your perspective first, Rashmi, and then I can.
Okay, so how do we increase memory of the present moment? So if I get your question right, Darshan, you are wanting to remember the experience?
Yes, in a type of way to not forget that, because obviously some of the skills that you acquire while being in the present will come into use in later life or in the future. So for example, what we've learned presently or in the past in this lecture would be applied in the future.
So how do we enhance that ability of being able to remember? You know, what I have come to understand and what I've come to experience with the here and now, it comes with practice. So if you continually practice this whole experience of being in the here and now, you know, we call it coping strategies, but nonetheless, it is skills that we want to become abilities. So an ability is a higher level than a skill. A skill is something we'd continually practice until it becomes an ability. So all the strategies that we did share with you, and namely the one you speak of, mindfulness, would come with practice. So if you continually practice being mindful of the here and now, it will facilitate that memory of that experience. At the same time, when we look at mindfulness, we can use our senses to capture the here and now. So what I do, and I'm just sharing from a personal experience and what has worked for me, is I become in tuned in what am I hearing. Perhaps it is the little chirping or the subtle chirping of the bird or the trickle of the water. Or so it's what am I hearing? What am I seeing? What am I noticing? What am I smelling? So the whole mindful experience is about being in the here and now and using your senses to encapsulate the whole experience. And then it is a memory. And then it registers in one's being. Frankie, over to you, and then Darshan, if we have answered you sufficiently. Frankie?
I don't have too much more to add there, Rashmi, other than the fact that sometimes the reason we struggle to remember situations is because we are trying to attend to too many things at once. So like Rashmi was saying there with her experience of being able to set time apart, from her day-to-day demands and expectations. Darshan, we can sometimes be at risk for moving around on the move and trying to do more than one thing at a time. So maybe being able to prioritize things. I think that was in the advert that went out about the idea of prioritizing, to be able to then set things aside, sit and focus in the here and now. That can also facilitate memory and the ability to retain it.
Okay, so thank you for the answers. I feel that yeah, both of them are sufficiently enough, and I'll try to practice them in my day-to-day life. So the second thing I just wanted to ask is also meditation helpful in this practices? And also the second or third follow-up question to this, is nicotine or caffeine as a drug, because they are psychoactive drugs, helpful as coping mechanisms? Because you can take these in different forms. So certain people are smoking cigarettes, right, which have a bunch of chemicals that are carcinogenic, where certain people are taking, vape, which we don't have enough studies of, or people are taking patches or using snuff and things like this, or putting it in their mouth. And maybe these have less side effects, but also could help in alleviation of stress. So I just wanted to ask your opinion on that.
I think, Frankie, I hand this over to you because you have done the research, and I think you'd be able to explain this one well.
Maybe just to clarify the first part there, Darshan, on the meditation, I think maybe from Rashmi sharing that I maybe was answered, but if you want to follow up on that.
Yeah, in general, because
yes, so maybe I'll hand that
fine.
part back to Rashmi. But to answer about the use of substances, nicotine, because I think that relates to what I was saying there about one of the reactions or indicators that we can have towards being in a stressful situation. It's when we are leading on our unhealthy coping mechanisms. I'm going to coin them in that way because there are many studies to support that over time they do have physical and even mental consequences on our functioning. But those unhealthy coping mechanisms are sometimes only temporary. They're almost a band-aid on the situation, but they're not uncovering the underlying problems. So say, for example, I'm using nicotine frequently throughout the day in any form to try and manage my stress at work, but I'm not addressing the work situation itself. It means that stress is there and that stressor is still there, and the nicotine use is not sufficiently managing it. So with regards to the different nicotine substances that are available, they're sometimes used as a method of decreasing cigarette use because of, as you said, there's all the neurochemical adjustments that need to take place in withdrawing. So I don't think any of those are supported by any medical practitioners other than the process of smoking cessation. But I hope that answers your question. Sometimes it is definitely thrown around that cigarettes can be a good stress reliever, but often it leaves the underlying stressor unresolved, and therefore it's still ineffective. The same would be with any of the other unhealthy coping mechanisms that tend to be applied. I don't know if that answers your question.
Okay, thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Yeah, so it would be more helpful to be able to identify what is the stress and what actions can I take in
and
that.
what's causing it, and then you can try to change those actions and thoughts and then resolve what's causing the stress. Therefore, you don't need any substance or anything to lean on.
Absolutely.
Yes,
Okay.
yes, Darshan.
Thanks very much.
Darshan, would you still like more clarification on the meditation then?
Well, I was just asking because you were talking about mindfulness, right? And
Yes.
I learned a different type of meditation where you focus on a mantra, and
Yes.
you are now only focusing on this one thing. And I feel that the purpose of that type of meditation, or actually any type of meditation, is just to focus on one point.
Yes. Darshan, literature does state that meditation, and once more, we're going back to literature because I think, us as academics, myself and Frankie is an academic as well, that we need to always back everything we do with literature. And literature does say that meditation is it's into two major groups, okay, very loosely defined into two major groups, the one being the focused method and the one being the open method. So the focused method is where you might then concentrate on your breath or concentrate on a mantra, or concentrate on loving kindness affirmations. So you can also have a read on this. That's meditation. I'm just describing the two legs of it very loosely. There are different types as well. But then the other side of it is called the open method. And the open method is then the mindfulness technique. Darshan, does that make sense? So all still fits under the umbrella term of meditation. Does
Okay,
that
that
make sense?
makes 100% sense. And I just wanted to add one thing that's just something of mine that I wanted to share with everyone. It's just that I think that everything is made up of matter, right? And that matter is made up of atoms, and the atoms are made up of what? Neutrons, protons, and electrons. And the electrons are vibrating and are in constant motion. So if we can take this frequency that is given to everything around us, whether it be a table, a living organism, or us, ourselves in our body, and increase the frequency at a higher frequency and increase our consciousness through meditation, through the open kind, through the closed kind, we can increase our consciousness and live better lives.
Oh, yes, we do believe that. And I think so nicely, Frankie also explained when she was explaining about how the, tipping the equation and increasing the resilience. And what is resilience all about? It is about my own internal mechanisms, my own consciousness, the thoughts. So also very nicely embodied in what you now said. Frankie, anything to add? No.
I think that's all answered there. I don't know if there's any more questions. I don't see any hands up.
No more questions.
None that I can see.
Okay, so there's some thank yous, and we appreciate that. And I want to say a very heartfelt thank you to you, Frankie, for also being with us today and taking this opportunity to sharing what you have shared with us. And especially you so nicely explained many things, but I so appreciated when you explained the link between stress and then burnout, and then the link between boundaries and self-nurturing. So nicely explained, and I thank you for that and for being with us today.
Thank you so much for the opportunity, and thank you everyone for attending.
Yes,
Thank
thanks
you.
everyone for attending.
Thank you, Rashmi. Thank you, Frankie. It was very beautiful sharing. Thanks a lot and learned a lot. Good night, everyone.
Good night.
Thank you. Good night.